The letter showed up on a Tuesday morning, stamped certified mail, demanding I hand over $47,000 in fines for supposedly violating HOA rules. The catch? I wasn't even in their HOA. Picture the scene. I'm standing in my kitchen, steam curling from my coffee mug, staring at this legal paperwork that might as well have been scribbled in a dead language. Through the window, I catch sight of Karen Whitmore, the queen bee of neighborhood control, standing on her immaculate lawn. She's pointing toward my house like she's planning a military invasion. Her grass sparkles with dew, the kind that looks measured by rulers to ensure perfection. I took another slow sip of coffee, narrowed my eyes, and thought, lady, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. So let me ask you, what would you do if someone tried to shove you into an HOA you never agreed to join? Drop your own HOA nightmare in the comments, I'd bet mine will top it. But before I pull you into this roller coaster of legal insanity, tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how many of you are living under neighborhood tyrants right now. My name is Garrett Mitchell, and 12 years ago, I thought I'd bought my slice of the American dream. Instead, I ended up neck-deep in a nightmare handcrafted by a woman who makes dictators look reasonable. Back in 2011, fresh out of the army after 2 tours in Afghanistan, I used my VA loan to buy 2.3 acres of freedom. My place is a 1970s ranch house, built on what used to be the Hendricks family farm, long before subdivisions and HOA rulebooks infected the area. My land sits just outside the border of Willowbrook Estates, separated by Willow Creek, a ribbon of water that became my daily reminder that some boundaries are carved by nature, not by lawyers. I work as an independent contractor. Electrical, plumbing, carpentry, whatever keeps food on the table for me and my teenage daughter, Emma. After my divorce, this house became our sanctuary. I built a workshop out back where the smell of pine shavings blends with WD-40, and every morning I breathe air that isn't poisoned by chemical lawn sprays. Emma loves it here. She's got endless space, a creek for catching tadpoles, and, most importantly, a dad who's finally present instead of always deployed overseas. But then came Karen Whitmore. The human embodiment of HOA fever dreams. She's in her early 50s, drives a spotless white Lexus that's never seen dirt, and presides over her $800,000 McMansion like Marie Antoinette with a clipboard. 6 years of being HOA president has turned her into a professional watchdog. She knows everyone's trash pickup day, lawn height, and even how often you mow. And her husband, Brad? He's not just the guy mowing her lawn. He's the county planning commissioner. That fact will matter a lot later, but tuck it away for now under giant conflict of interest. Our first run-in happened at the mailbox, one Tuesday morning. Karen came storming across the street like a general on parade, pearls around her neck, clipboard clutched in hand. Her high heels crunched on the gravel with all the subtlety of artillery fire. "Your workshop violates neighborhood standards," she announced, skipping any introduction. I glanced from my workshop to her palace across the creek, then back to her. "Ma'am, I'm not in your HOA." Her smile was sharp enough to freeze boiling coffee. "We'll see about that." That was 18 months ago. What followed could only be described as psychological warfare. Karen started documenting my life like she was building a case file for the FBI. She tracked my work schedule down to the hour, photographed visitors, and glared at me through her window whenever I fired up the table saw. She even bought binoculars. But the final straw, the thing that truly lit her fuse, was Emma's 16th birthday party. Nothing crazy, just a backyard barbecue, friends, and music until 9:30 p.m. Well within county noise ordinances. Karen still called the cops. Twice. Both times, the officers found nothing wrong and left shaking their heads. One even grabbed a burger and joked that our disturbance was the tamest he'd dealt with all week. The next morning, everything escalated. Emma spotted a violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper. The paper felt too official, too polished to be anything but nonsense dressed up in legal formatting. It listed my workshop, garden fence, and gravel driveway as unauthorized modifications, with fines of $500 each. Emma frowned, reading it like it was about to bite. Dad, this woman's lost her mind. And she was right. But here's what Karen was banking on, that I'd cave like every other hard-working family she'd bullied into submission. Tear down my workshop, pay her fines, and fall in line with her suburban police state. What she didn't realize was that Karen's intimidation playbook had one fatal flaw: she'd forgotten to do her homework. Because if she had checked the county records, she would have seen the truth: my property wasn't part of her HOA. It had been deliberately excluded, for reasons that would eventually unravel her entire empire. But narcissists don't research. They attack. So I poured myself another cup of coffee, walked to the fence line, and looked across Willow Creek at her picture-perfect lawn and house, sitting on a foundation of corruption. Lady, I muttered to the morning air, you just picked a fight with the wrong veteran. And the creek kept flowing, blissfully indifferent to human stupidity, a perfect omen for the storm about to hit. 3 days after Emma's birthday barbecue, Karen made her first official move. A certified letter landed in my mailbox, the kind that forces you to sign before they hand over the harassment. This wasn't some sloppy handwritten complaint. No, Karen had gone all out. It was a glossy, full-color document printed on paper so slick and expensive it practically screamed I'm important. The violations read like a nightmare dreamed up by a frustrated bureaucrat. According to her, I was guilty of an unpermitted workshop structure, a non-compliant garden fence, an unauthorized gravel driveway, and failure to maintain landscaping standards consistent with community guidelines. Each infraction carried a $500 fine. I had 30 days to comply, or face escalated enforcement actions, including liens and legal proceedings. I almost laughed at the sheer commitment to intimidation. But she'd overlooked one tiny, devastating detail. My first stop was the county courthouse. The place smelled like mildew, dust, and decades of bitter property disputes. A clerk named Dorothy, who looked like she'd seen every petty neighbor feud in history, helped me pull my property deed. The document dated back to 1970, long before Willowbrook Estates even existed. Back in Afghanistan, our intel officer used to say, always check primary sources. Secondary sources lie. Turns out that advice works just as well for land law as it does for avoiding IEDs. Sure enough, the deed made it crystal clear: my property sat 47 feet outside of HOA jurisdiction, separated by the natural boundary of Willow Creek. The subdivision wasn't even created until nearly 40 years later. Just to be thorough, I called the HOA management company. After being bounced on hold 3 times, the receptionist finally admitted the obvious: sir, your address isn't in our system. Which means, you're not in our HOA. She said it like she was explaining math to a kindergartner. You'd think that would have been the end of it. But if Karen had one defining trait, it was an inability to accept reality. 2 days later, she showed up on my porch with reinforcements. Beside her stood her brother-in-law, Rick, a self-proclaimed part-time surveyor whose biggest credential seemed to be owning an orange vest and a tape measure. The stench of his bargain bin cologne mixed with Karen's perfume of desperation as they stood there, trying to look official. They claimed the creek had shifted over time, changing property lines. Rick waved his measuring tape like it was a magic wand that could rewrite county law. I held up my certified survey and said, "Ma'am, water doesn't move property lines. That's not how the law works." Karen's face flushed red. "We'll see what my attorney says about that." And that was her fatal mistake, hinting she had lawyers before doing her homework. While she was busy playing amateur boundary cop, I was about to uncover something explosive about the origins of Willowbrook Estates itself. One afternoon, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, invited me in for coffee and gossip, the kind of gossip that shifts the course of legal battles. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and history. She'd lived there since before the subdivision even existed. "The strangest thing," she said, stirring sugar with slow precision. When they first planned Willowbrook, your property was deliberately excluded. Something about flood zones and environmental regulations. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But Brad, you know, Karen's husband, pushed the approval through anyway. His construction company got the contract for more than half of those houses. The puzzle pieces started falling into place. My army training kicked in. When the enemy reveals their pattern, you exploit it. A week later, another violation notice appeared. This time, Karen accused me of creating a nuisance that lowered property values. She'd hired Pembroke & Associates, one of those billboard law firms that charge by intimidation. But here's the irony, the more she escalated, the more allies I gained. The Kowalski family approached me in the grocery store like we were plotting a revolution in the produce aisle. They'd been forced to remove their kid's swing set because it violated aesthetic guidelines, racking up $8,000 in modifications they couldn't afford. She told us we'd face legal action if we didn't comply, Mrs. Kowalski whispered. Mrs. Patterson also mentioned the Rodriguez family, who had moved away after Karen's harassment extended to contacting their employers. A clear pattern emerged. Karen was targeting working-class families who couldn't afford long legal fights, while mysteriously ignoring her wealthy neighbors' violations. The best part? Every glossy violation notice, every recorded phone call, every creepy binocular sighting, it all became evidence. Karen thought she was tightening the noose on me. She was really building her own. The creek kept flowing between us, steady and indifferent, a natural border she could never cross, no matter how many surveys or lawsuits she threw my way. Karen's next strike landed with all the grace of a sledgehammer. 2 weeks after my courthouse visit, I opened the mailbox to find a thick envelope from Pembroke & Associates, her hired legal muscle. The weight alone screamed expensive. Inside was a cease and desist letter, written with all the melodrama of a TV courtroom script. 4 pages of whereas, and hereto, demanding I shut down my workshop, submit to HOA authority, and allow them access to install boundary markers on my land. Think about the audacity here, she wanted permission to trespass so she could prove I was trespassing. I'd seen this playbook before in the army. When you can't win legitimately, you bury your target in paperwork, hoping they collapse under the weight of it. But instead of folding, I called in reinforcements of my own. That's when Janet Reeves entered the story. She's a local attorney, sharp as a razor, known for defending veterans and making bullies choke on their own paperwork. Her office smelled of leather-bound books and righteous anger. She read Karen's letter, laughed out loud, and said, "Garrett, this woman just handed us a harassment case on a silver platter." Janet fired back with a counter cease and desist that was pure poetry in legal form. 3 tight paragraphs citing property rights statutes, harassment laws, and a warning that further nonsense would trigger immediate action. She even reminded Karen that demanding access to private land without authority is called attempted trespass. Karen didn't take it well. Within days, she convened an emergency HOA meeting, turning the community center into her personal stage. Armed with charts and graphs, she claimed my workshop was tanking everyone's home equity. Her evidence was laughable, but she played it up like she was presenting to Congress. The kicker. She accused me of running an illegal business. Here's what she didn't understand: small, home-based businesses are perfectly legal when you're properly licensed and zoned. My contractor's license was valid, my insurance up to date, and my property zoned for exactly what I was doing. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in propaganda. Her whisper network kicked into overdrive. Suddenly, neighbors were getting concerned citizen updates warning about the unlicensed contractor endangering children across the creek. The campaign got county code enforcement involved. One morning, a weary inspector named Phillips showed up at my door, clipboard in hand. After half an hour of checking my permits, he sighed. "Off the record," he said while packing up, "whoever's filing these complaints is wasting taxpayer money. Your setup is cleaner than most commercial shops I inspect." But Karen wasn't done. Not long after, my security cameras caught her brother-in-law Rick sneaking onto my property at dawn. He was hammering orange stakes into the ground, deliberately making it look like my workshop was creeping into HOA territory. When I confronted him, he stammered something about preliminary measurements and bolted. The smell of his nervous sweat lingered long after his pickup truck rattled away. Emma felt it too. She started dreading her walk to the bus stop. She noticed Karen's daily surveillance drives always seemed to line up with her schedule. One morning, Emma spotted Karen parked at the creek bridge, photographing our house with a telephoto lens. "Dad, this is getting seriously creepy," Emma said over breakfast. Her voice carried that edge of fear you never want to hear from your kid, the sound of not feeling safe in your own home. That's when I knew Karen had crossed a line. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was intimidation. And intimidation cuts both ways. Meanwhile, cracks were forming in her empire. The neighborhood's private Facebook group, Willowbrook Neighbors, exploded into open warfare. Some backed Karen, clinging to her property value argument. But more and more residents began sharing their own horror stories of her harassment. Comment threads turned into digital battlegrounds, full of emojis and passive-aggressive suburbia speak. Then came the bombshell. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet old neighbor who pretended to nap during meetings, revealed she'd been recording Karen for years. She poured tea with steady hands and said, "Honey, I've got tapes that would curl your hair." That's when I realized Karen hadn't just declared war on me, she'd accidentally declared war on her own community. And the creek kept flowing between us, calm as ever, a reminder that while Karen tangled herself in her own paranoia, nature didn't care. But I cared. And I wasn't backing down. Karen's nuclear option arrived one Thursday morning, hidden inside another thick stack of glossy legal drama. A sheriff's deputy knocked on my door and handed me papers for a $47,000 lawsuit. This wasn't just about fines anymore. Karen had leveled up her fantasy. According to her filing, by owning property within a 5-mile radius of Willowbrook Estates, I had implicitly agreed to their HOA rules. She demanded full compliance, a permanent injunction against further modifications, and repayment of her legal fees. Reading the complaint felt like flipping through a bad courtroom TV script written by someone who fell asleep during law school. I took it straight to Janet. Her office sunlight caught her glasses as she flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from concern to outright anger. "Garrett," she said, "this woman is either delusional, or running the most expensive bluff in county history." But Janet's deep dive uncovered something darker than bluffing. Karen had a pattern. Court records showed she'd filed 6 other boundary disputes over the past decade. 3 families had actually moved away, crushed by the legal costs. The Rodriguez family, the same ones Mrs. Patterson mentioned, had lost their house entirely after drowning in fees. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a predator. She hunted middle-class families, weaponizing bureaucracy until they either surrendered or fled. Wealthier neighbors, on the other hand, their violations mysteriously disappeared. And just as we processed the scope of her racket, Karen launched her media offensive. Local news ran a story titled, "HOA Battle Divides Neighborhood." The segment showed Karen in pearls, pointing dramatically at my workshop like it was leaking toxic waste into the creek. She talked about protecting hard-working families from one reckless neighbor destroying property values. They never interviewed me. She'd told the reporters I was unavailable for comment. News to me, since nobody ever called. But the spin job backfired in the most spectacular way. Emma's best friend, Madison, became our inside source. Her parents, the Kowalskis, were also victims, which meant Madison overheard things during book club nights and casual gossip at Karen's house. What she caught was damning. Karen bragged to her circle about finally finding a way to get rid of that contractor and his noisy shop. Madison recorded it on her phone, pretending to do homework. Suddenly, Karen's noble, property value, crusade looked a whole lot more like personal revenge. The harassment escalated beyond legal games into sabotage. One morning, I found roofing nails scattered across my driveway. 2 tires on my work truck were shredded. The smell of rubber and betrayal filled the air as I picked nails from the treads. Emma's car wasn't spared either. At school, someone had keyed the word "move" across the driver's side door. She tried not to cry when she showed me, but the damage cut deeper than the paint. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes, showing grainy photos of my workshop with captions like, "Unlicensed contractor endangering families." They listed my phone number, urging people to report me. State inspectors investigated. And guess what? They found nothing. Because there was nothing. But the damage was done. Nervous clients started backing away. My business income dropped nearly 30%. And then came the moment that tipped me from defense to offense. One evening, I spotted Karen herself sitting across the creek in her Lexus, binoculars in hand. She wasn't even embarrassed when our eyes locked. She simply jotted something on her clipboard, put the car in gear, and drove off. That was it. The psychological pressure she thought would break me had done the opposite. Because compared to combat stress in Afghanistan, suburban spy games were child's play. And then Janet struck gold. Her research uncovered planning documents from 2009, official county files that explicitly stated my property was to be excluded from Willowbrook Estates due to creek flood zone regulations. Even worse, the paperwork carried a handwritten note, Commissioner Whitmore advised, flood zone exclusion mandatory for EPA compliance. That meant Brad, Karen's husband, knew, without question, that my land could never be part of their subdivision. This wasn't confusion. It was fraud. It was conspiracy. It was harassment wrapped in suburban respectability. The creek flowed steady and silent, carrying their lies downstream, one by one. But Karen wasn't finished self-destructing. Not by a long shot. The discovery that changed everything didn't come from a courtroom or a lawyer. It came from the dusty basement of the county courthouse, in a filing cabinet that smelled like mildew and forgotten battles. Janet's paralegal, Sarah, treated legal research like an archaeological dig. She'd been combing through environmental records from 2009 when she unearthed the smoking gun, the Willowbrook Estates environmental assessment. The document spelled doom for Karen. It explicitly recommended excluding my property, labeled Parcel 47B, the Hendricks Homestead, from subdivision development because of flood zone regulations and ecological protections. But there was more. Scrawled in the margin was a handwritten note. Commissioner Whitmore advised, exclusion mandatory for EPA compliance. Brad Whitmore hadn't just known about my exclusion, he'd been officially warned that including my land would break federal law. Janet spread the papers across her conference table like a general laying out a battle plan. "Garrett," she said, tapping the signature line, "this gets worse." The HOA's incorporation papers included a signature from Robert Rise, the previous owner of my property. The problem? Robert had been dead for 6 months when that document was allegedly notarized. Handwriting analysis confirmed our suspicion, the signature was forged. Someone had literally faked a dead man's consent to rope my land into an HOA it never belonged to. And that wasn't the only revelation. Sarah cross-referenced property tax records with Karen's financial history. What she uncovered was devastating. Karen's sparkling McMansion was drowning in debt. She'd refinanced 3 separate times, pulling cash out of inflated property values. Her survival depended on keeping those values propped up. If the market dipped, she'd lose everything. Janet connected the dots. She's been using HOA harassment to artificially inflate values. Every family she forced to remodel, repaint, or relocate boosted her equity bubble. This lawsuit? It's not about rules. It's about her survival. But Karen had made a fatal miscalculation. She wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was committing fraud against the entire neighborhood. That's when Mrs. Patterson dropped her final bombshell. She'd been secretly recording HOA board meetings for years, stashing away cassette tapes like a Cold War spy. One recording from March 2022 captured Karen's own voice. "That contractor's property technically isn't ours, but he'll never fight it. Working people can't afford lawyers. Just keep the pressure up until he gives in or moves away." Another gem from June. "Brad says we can't legally force him to join. But what's he going to do? Hire an attorney? People like that always fold once you bury them in paperwork." And the most chilling recording came right after Emma's birthday. "I've finally found a way to get rid of that veteran and his noisy shop. We'll bleed him in legal fees until he breaks." Her arrogance was her undoing. She'd confessed to the whole scheme, in her own voice, on tape. But the corruption went even deeper. Brad's construction company had built 60% of the houses in Willowbrook Estates. They sold them at inflated prices, backed by the illusion of a legitimate HOA with strict standards. Every fine Karen issued, every fee collected, every lawsuit filed, it was all built on a foundation of fraud. Sitting in Janet's office surrounded by evidence boxes, I realized this wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy that had stolen from dozens of families. The only question was, would we settle for surviving Karen's harassment, or go for total victory? For me, Emma's keyed car and 18 months of constant intimidation answered that question. We were going for total victory. The War Council assembled in my workshop that weekend. The place smelled of sawdust, coffee, and justice. Janet spread legal documents across my workbench. Mrs. Patterson arrived with her legendary thermos of strong coffee. The Kowalski family sat across from us, and the Rodriguezes joined via video call. It wasn't just me anymore. It was an army. Emma typed notes on her laptop like it was the most important school project of her life. Watching her, I felt both proud and furious, that my 16-year-old had to learn about corruption firsthand. Janet outlined the strategy. First, we file a motion to dismiss based on fraudulent incorporation. Next, we launch a countersuit, harassment, conspiracy, business interference. Then, we request an injunction freezing all HOA fee collections until we prove their foundation is illegal. Mrs. Patterson's cassettes were sent to a stenographer for transcription. The audio was surprisingly clear, better than most digital recordings. Hearing Karen's casual cruelty typed into official transcripts gave everyone in the room chills. We weren't just preparing a case. We were building something closer to an indictment. County planning documents revealed Brad's abuse of office. Financial records showed how his company profited off every renovation Karen forced. My security cameras provided video of Rick hammering fake survey stakes into my yard. Madison's recording of Karen bragging at book club sealed the motive. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her notes, "this woman basically confessed to everything. How stupid is she?" "Not stupid," Mrs. Patterson corrected, stirring her coffee. "Arrogant. She thought she was untouchable." Our plan didn't stop at court. Janet had a media strategy too. She contacted investigative reporter Sarah Morgan, who specialized in HOA corruption. A press release was drafted, outlining Karen's pattern of targeting working-class families across the county. At the same time, technical experts were lined up. A surveyor to confirm my boundaries. An environmental engineer to verify the flood zone exclusion. A handwriting expert to testify the incorporation documents were forged. Financial auditors to prove HOA funds had been misused. Piece by piece, we built a case that looked less like a neighbor dispute and more like a RICO trial. By Sunday evening, my workshop had transformed into a war room. Evidence boxes stacked like ammo crates. Witness lists pinned to the wall. Emma's laptop glowing with typed strategies. The creek outside gurgled in the twilight, carrying a sound that felt almost like approval. War was coming to Willowbrook Estates. And for the first time, Karen wasn't the one dictating the terms. Karen's desperation oozed through every move she made after our war council. One evening, she showed up on my porch wearing a designer blazer and clutching a folder like it held the solution to world peace. The smell of perfume mixed with panic as she forced a smile. "Let's be reasonable," she began. "I'll settle this misunderstanding for $15,000. That's a fraction of what you owe." It was surreal. This same woman who once demanded $47,000 in fines was now trying to sell me on a bargain bin settlement. I leaned against the doorframe, calm as could be. "Ma'am, I don't negotiate with extortionists." Her painted smile cracked. "You'll regret this decision, Mr. Mitchell." And just like that, the harassment turned more personal, and more dangerous. Anonymous posts started popping up on neighborhood social media, questioning my military service. Karen supporters whispered that I was an unstable veteran with PTSD, a danger to local kids. It was vile, and it hit like a gut punch, not because it was true, but because it weaponized stereotypes against veterans while targeting my relationship with Emma. Then came outright sabotage. One morning, my workshop's power went out. I discovered the main line had been sliced with bolt cutters, the copper ends dangling like severed veins. If I hadn't caught it quickly, the electrical short could have started a fire. Security cameras caught it all, a hooded figure creeping in at 3 a.m., cutting the line, then vanishing toward the creek. The footage wasn't clear enough to prove it was Rick, but the timing spoke volumes. It happened just days after I rejected Karen's settlement. 2 days later, Emma found nails scattered in neat clusters across our driveway. Not random, deliberately arranged where our tires rolled out. She stood beside me, broom in hand, voice shaking. "Dad, I'm scared. What if she takes it further?" That's when I made the hardest decision yet. Emma would stay with Mrs. Patterson until this was over. Watching her pack close because of neighborhood terrorism filled me with a rage hotter than anything I'd felt overseas. County Building Inspector Phillips showed up for yet another random safety check, his third in 2 months. He flipped through his clipboard, then gave me a look of weary sympathy. "Mr. Mitchell, your property's spotless. Whoever keeps filing these reports is wasting everyone's time. And taxpayer money." But Karen's sabotage campaign wasn't just physical. She hit me where it hurt most, my livelihood. Several of my contracting clients received anonymous calls, warning them about hiring an unlicensed contractor under investigation. The calls were professional, scripted, and specific enough to spook people. My business income dropped another 40% almost overnight. Karen was systematically trying to starve me out. One evening, I caught her parked across the creek again, this time with professional-grade surveillance gear. Binoculars. A telephoto lens. A notebook. She didn't flinch when I walked to the fence line and waved. Instead, she snapped photos of me taking photos of her. Meanwhile, Brad's panic was becoming visible too. Neighbors reported seeing him burning papers in his backyard fire pit, the smoke reeking of secrets turning to ash. His county job was under investigation, and he knew it. Through it all, Madison kept feeding us intelligence from inside Karen's crumbling kingdom. She overheard shouting matches between Karen and Brad, late-night visits from lawyers, and panicked phone calls that ended with Karen screaming about conspiracies. "She's been crying a lot," Madison reported to Emma during one of their check-ins. "She keeps saying everyone's ganging up on her." The irony was beautiful. Every desperate act, every whispered lie, every broken law, she was documenting her own downfall for us. But Karen still had one last weapon left, her ability to perform. And the stage for her breakdown was already set. The County Planning Commission's public hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Its sterile conference room, usually reserved for zoning disputes and road budgets, was about to become a battlefield. Karen arrived early, transforming the space into her personal war room. She'd hired a presentation consultant, maxed out her credit cards for visual aids, and donned a sharp business suit meant to scream respectable victim. Her PowerPoint was suburban propaganda at its finest, Color-coded charts predicting property value collapse, glossy photos of my workshop taken from unflattering angles, and testimonials from neighbors who had been promised lower HOA fees in exchange for their support. It was harassment dressed as performance art. Emma and Madison sat in the back row, phones recording everything like war correspondence. Mrs. Patterson organized families who'd been terrorized by Karen, ready to testify. Janet sharpened her responses to whatever fiction Karen planned to unleash. Reporter Sarah Morgan brought a photographer, ensuring that Karen's nightmare would be immortalized in the press. The air reeked of nervous sweat and ambition. Karen realized too late this wasn't going to be her stage-managed performance, it was about to be her public undoing. She opened with crocodile tears and dramatic flourishes, painting me as an illegal business owner destroying family values and community standards. She gestured at blown-up photos like she was prosecuting a crime scene. The crowd murmured sympathetically, until the county engineer interrupted with a single question. "Ma'am, according to your survey, this property line runs 30 feet into Willow Creek. Are you suggesting the creek moved?" Her consultant stammered about natural boundary shifts, while the professional surveyor in the audience winced visibly. The lie collapsed under its own weight. When my turn came, I stuck to facts. No emotion, no theatrics. The original 1970 deed. A professional survey proving I was 47 feet outside HOA reach. The 2009 environmental study excluding my land for flood protection. Then Janet unleashed the heavy artillery, Mrs. Patterson's cassette tapes. The scratchy speaker filled the room with Karen's own voice. "That contractor's property isn't technically ours, but he'll never fight us. Just keep the pressure up until he gives in." Karen went pale. The next tape rolled. "Brad says we can't legally force him. But people like that fold when you throw paperwork at them." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Then came the handwriting expert, projecting blown-up images of Robert Rice's forged signature. He explained how the shaky strokes showed simulation, not natural writing, and how the signature date came 6 months after the man's death. Even non-experts could see it. It was fraud in black and white. Karen's unraveling began in real time. She interrupted witnesses, shouted "fake news," and accused the commission of conspiracy. When the HOA management company's representative confirmed they were cutting ties over financial irregularities, Karen snapped completely. She grabbed the microphone, screaming about betrayal, corruption, and conspiracies. Security had to escort her out as she shrieked promises of revenge. The commission's vote was swift and brutal. Willowbrook's HOA incorporation was fraudulent, all enforcement actions were void, environmental remediation was mandatory, and criminal referrals were being sent to the district attorney. Outside, Sarah Morgan shoved a microphone in my face. I said simply, "Sometimes standing up to bullies means protecting everyone else who can't." Emma hugged me, eyes bright with pride. Karen tried to give her own counter-interview, but the cameras captured only incoherent ranting about veterans, lawyers, and conspiracies. It went viral within hours. For the first time in years, the neighborhood cheered, not for her downfall alone, but for freedom. Mrs. Patterson even threw a celebratory barbecue. The smell of charcoal and justice filled the night air. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of Karen's reckoning. The fallout from Karen's public implosion spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. Every lien, every fine, every bogus enforcement she'd thrown at families was legally nullified overnight. The families she'd tormented were now eligible for restitution. Brad was suspended from his county planning role while investigators dug through his dealings. But Karen wasn't done humiliating herself. The next county commission meeting was standing room only. News crews packed the aisles. Sarah Morgan's investigative article, HOA Fraud Exposed, How One Couple Terrorized a Neighborhood, had dropped that morning, exploding online like a bomb. The district attorney sent an observer with a notepad, ready to collect evidence for criminal charges. Karen arrived fashionably late, strutting in with a consultant she'd hired to make fraud look professional. She launched into another PowerPoint about community values and neighborhood stability. Her 3 remaining supporters sat in the front row, looking more like stranded passengers on a sinking ship than true believers. She pointed at blown-up photos of my workshop equipment, claiming it was an industrial hazard threatening children. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she gestured toward me. "This veteran has brought outside agitators and radical lawyers to destroy our way of life." The irony was unbearable. Karen, who forged signatures and ran a protection racket, lecturing about community values. When it was my turn, I laid out the evidence methodically. The 1940s deed proving my land predated the subdivision by decades. Construction records from the 1970s, long before Karen existed in the picture. The 2009 environmental study excluding my parcel from HOA jurisdiction. And finally, the forged incorporation papers with a dead man's name. Each witness tightened the noose. Mrs. Patterson's recordings played across the loudspeakers, Karen's own words dripping with arrogance. "Working people can't afford lawyers. We just bury them in paperwork until they fold." The surveyor demonstrated live how the creek marked the true boundary. The environmental engineer explained how Karen's boundary tampering endangered the entire ecosystem. A former county planner described Brad's intimidation tactics when pushing approvals through. And then came Janet with the nuclear option, the original developer agreement from 2010, signed by both Karen and Brad, which clearly acknowledged my property's exclusion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Janet said, holding it up for the commission and cameras alike, "this proves they knew. This was deliberate fraud." Karen's mask shattered. She screamed about lies, conspiracies, and corruption. She accused the commission of being bought off by radical outsiders. She refused to give up the microphone until security officers pried it from her hands and dragged her from the chamber. The unanimous vote was merciless. Willowbrook's HOA was dissolved as fraudulent, environmental remediation would begin immediately, and criminal referrals were sent straight to the DA's office. Outside, Sarah Morgan captured the perfect contrast. I spoke calmly about protecting neighbors from bullies. Emma, beaming with pride, stood beside me. Meanwhile, Karen's counter-interview was incoherent chaos, accusations about veterans, radical lawyers, and traitor neighbors. The footage went viral, cementing her reputation as the suburban tyrant who completely lost her grip. That evening, as word spread, families filled the streets. Kids laughed, neighbors hugged, and Mrs. Patterson organized a spontaneous block party. The smell of grilled burgers and smoke mingled with the relief of freedom. But for Karen, the nightmare was only beginning. 6 months after Karen's spectacular meltdown at the commission hearing, justice came knocking with the sound of handcuffs and frozen bank accounts. Both Karen and Brad were indicted on a laundry list of charges: fraud, conspiracy, harassment, forgery, and abuse of office. The district attorney, fueled by airtight evidence and public outrage, pushed for the maximum penalties. Karen's plea deal was brutal in its poetry. She received 18 months of probation, full restitution to every family she'd harassed, mandatory community service cleaning the very creek she tried to manipulate, and a lifetime ban from ever serving on an HOA board again. Brad wasn't spared. He lost his county position, faced the revocation of his professional licenses, and watched his construction empire collapse as clients fled faster than rats from a sinking ship. My countersuit ended in a settlement that changed our lives. Emma's college fund went from maybe community college to any university she dreams of. The Kowalskis and other families received compensation that wiped out years of forced renovations and emotional trauma. But the sweetest victory wasn't the money, it was watching Willowbrook transform. The neighborhood reorganized itself into the Willowbrook Neighbors Association, a voluntary group with Mrs. Patterson unanimously elected president. Her first official act was launching the annual Willow Creek Environmental Festival, where families celebrated conservation instead of measuring grass blades with rulers. My workshop became the community hub. The smell of sawdust mixed with coffee and laughter as neighbors gathered for potlucks, charity drives, and Little League planning. Emma loved hosting her friends there, the sound of their voices filling a space that had once been choked with tension. Even the creek seemed to heal. Great blue herons returned for the first time in decades. River otters played in clean water, and kingfishers dived for fish free from lawn chemicals. The neighborhood, once under Karen's thumb, felt alive again. The ripple effect stretched far beyond Willowbrook. Sarah Morgan's exposé uncovered 12 more fraudulent HOAs across 3 states. Lawmakers passed the Willowbrook Act, requiring independent oversight of HOA formations and financial transparency for all existing boards. Janet shifted her practice to specialize in HOA fraud, helping other families escape from petty tyrants. Veterans groups began teaching our strategy in workshops titled Defeating Domestic Terrorists with Clipboards. But my favorite outcome was Emma's transformation. She spoke at legislative hearings about HOA reform, her voice steady and confident, proving that even teenagers can stand tall against bullies. Watching her testify, I felt a pride deeper than any military medal. As for Karen, her fate was exactly what she deserved. Foreclosure claimed her McMansion. Brad filed for divorce, abandoning her in the wreckage. She moved into a cramped apartment where nobody measured her grass or timed her garbage cans. Occasionally, neighbors spotted her driving past her old kingdom, but she never stopped. Probably afraid we'd all come outside to wave. The settlement funds also birthed something new, the Willowbrook Creek Environmental Scholarship, sending local students to study conservation law. Each year, the festival raised money for it, turning Karen's corruption into an engine for community good. Our annual Property Rights Day festival drew families from 5 counties, celebrating neighborhoods built on cooperation instead of control. Mrs. Patterson even finished a written history of the saga, titling the final chapter, How One Tyrant United 50 Families Against Suburban Fascism. Calls started coming in from across the country. One homeowner from Arizona, battling her own HOA nightmare, asked for advice. That's when Emma suggested we go bigger. The Free the Neighborhoods Foundation launches next spring, dedicated to helping families fight back against abusive HOAs. But that's a story for another time. Right now, I'm watching the sunset paint Willow Creek gold while Emma and her friends tie ropes to the old oak, building a swing that would have violated 17 of Karen's imaginary regulations. The sound of kids laughing mixes with the rush of water and the hum of neighbors chatting in the distance. That's what freedom sounds like. And that's what victory smells like, smoke from the grill, fresh air off the creek, and not a clipboard in sight. Karen's downfall became a cautionary tale that stretched far beyond Willowbrook. Her mugshot circulated on local news, her name dragged through court dockets and investigative reports. She went from self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac to a disgraced former HOA president, banned from ever holding neighborhood power again. The criminal charges stuck. Fraud. Conspiracy. Harassment. Forgery. Abuse of office. The judge made an example out of both Karen and Brad, their sentencing broadcast on local TV as a warning to every other clipboard tyrant hiding behind HOA bylaws. Brad, stripped of his title and business, faded into obscurity. Karen, meanwhile, carried on in bitter anonymity, occasionally sighted skulking past Willowbrook in her aging Lexus, but never daring to stop. The very people she once lorded over now laughed at the memory of her tantrums. For us, life moved forward. Willowbrook shed its surveillance state skin and bloomed into a true community. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's binoculars now traded tools, shared meals, and planned events together. Instead of HOA fines, there were barbecues. Instead of intimidation, there was laughter. The annual Willow Creek Environmental Festival grew into something extraordinary. Families from all over came to celebrate clean water and wildlife restoration. Kids ran freely, painting signs about protecting the creek, their voices ringing with joy where once fear had lingered. The scholarship fund helped send local students to college, their futures brighter thanks to the restitution money Karen had been forced to cough up. Sarah Morgan's series on fraudulent HOAs sparked reform across multiple states. Politicians couldn't ignore it, new laws passed, financial transparency became mandatory, and oversight tightened. What started as Karen's crusade to control me ended up dismantling HOA corruption on a national scale. Emma blossomed into a leader. She testified at hearings, her confidence magnetic. She wrote essays about community rights, winning awards. Watching her speak truth to power, I knew she would never let anyone intimidate her again. And me? I kept working in my shop. The same smell of sawdust and coffee, now joined by the chatter of neighbors stopping by for advice or just to sit and talk. My once lonely refuge had become the beating heart of the community. Mrs. Patterson, ever sharp, finished her neighborhood chronicle and handed me the first copy. The last page read, "Bullies only win when good people stay silent." Willowbrook chose to fight. The Free the Neighborhoods Foundation launched the following spring. Calls poured in from families across the country, people trapped under the thumbs of their own Karens. Emma and I helped them with strategies, resources, and lawyers like Janet. We turned our nightmare into a blueprint for resistance. And every evening, when the creek bubbled outside my window, I was reminded of something simple. Karen tried to dam up freedom with paperwork and intimidation. But like water, freedom always finds a way through. Now, I want to hear your stories. Have you faced down a neighborhood dictator with too much power and not enough sense? Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments, I read every single one. Share this video with anyone who's dealing with an overreaching HOA. Knowledge is power, and power shared is power multiplied. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel for more takedowns of clipboard tyrants. Next week, I'll tell you about the retired teacher who exposed $200,000 in stolen landscaping fees and dissolved her HOA overnight. Because as long as there are petty dictators with measuring tapes and bad attitudes, we'll be here reminding them, property rights will always trump their personal convenience. That's it for today's story. If you enjoyed seeing karma served fresh, hit that like button, comment below, and join the fight against HOA madness. Together, we can turn every neighborhood back into what it's supposed to be, a community.